Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Paul Swaneveld. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Child and Family Studies, and I work with Misty Bingham, and we direct and coordinate the Families Alive lecture series. And we're grateful for sponsorship we have from the O.C. Tanner Corporation. And we are grateful for your attendance, and we want to welcome Dr. Tim Rarick, who's a professor and program director in family studies and child development at BYU, Idaho. He holds a PhD from Kansas State University in family studies and human development. He teaches courses on family systems, parenting, child development, policy, and faith-based approaches to family life. His scholarship focuses on fatherhood, media literacy, family policy, pornography prevention, and strengthening parent-child relationships. He's published in several peer-reviewed journals, think tanks, and has spoken at the United Nations, national, international conferences, and many universities. So we're excited to welcome Dr. Tim Rarick.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming today. I know you could have spent your lunch hour doing something else, and we'll find out if you regret that in about an hour, but I'm thankful that you're here. So I want to start off on a personal note. Well, two things. Number one is I taught at Kansas State University for 4 years, and so I feel like this is my brother or sister from another mother because we are purple and white Wildcats, and so are you. I never went here, but purple and white Wildcats, we can relate, right? So, and then on another personal note, my father-in-law, my wife's father, was a student officer here. He went to school here. And then lastly, Professor Genevieve Wise taught in the Child and Family Studies program here for many years. She passed away in 2003. She's a beloved professor. You can see that. I took some of this from her, I almost forgot, what is it called? Obituary, I almost said eulogy. From her obituary, research published and taught workshops in blended families. Child and Family Studies Department, there's a Genevieve Wise Dean's Excellence Scholarship. Does anybody have that scholarship in here, by any chance? Just thought I'd ask. And then lastly, began the Families Alive program that still continues today at Weber, right here. This is my wife's grandmother. She calls her Grandma Jen. So I didn't know this until 2 days ago, that my wife's grandma, Grandma Jen, who I met in 2001 before she passed away. And by the way, when I met her, she was at a care center, and after she met me, she said to her, my wife's family, "He is really handsome." So I just thought I'd plug that. But and then my wife reminds me she had dementia, so she didn't know what she was talking about. And I said, "Why are you demeaning your choice? You're the one who chose to marry me." But this is really special for me because my wife's grandmother has a genesis here. Okay, I'm going to just dive right into it, and I'm going to ask you you can write this down on your tablet, your smartphone, or a piece of paper, laptop. This is just based on a study, but I want to see how you would respond. So if you could write down 5 to 7 statements beginning with the words "I am." Just 5 to 7 statements. I avoided saying 6 or 7 statements on purpose because I have 4 children and I'm so tired of this. So 5 to 7 statements about yourself. I am 5 to 7 identifiers. I'll give you about 1 minute. Okay, how many of you have at least 4 or 5 so far? Okay. You could finish up what you're writing. While you're finishing that up, I'm just going to ask you, look at your list and categorize them into one of 2 categories. How many items are personal, internal, that's such as traits, preferences, emotions, abilities? This could even be personality traits. Achievements. Preferences could be all sorts of things, right? Anything from sexual preferences to hobbies to foods or whatever. And then number 2, you've got the second category, relational, social identifiers. Those would be like roles, relationships, group membership, obligations. Okay, as you look at your list, decide how many fall into category 1 and how many into category 2. Now, you may be split, but how many of you have a majority of the ones you wrote down in category 1? Okay. And how about category 2? It's fairly even split. And then how many of you were fairly even on both? Maybe you had an even number. Okay, so I'd say 3/4 was split and then 1/4 was even. The reason why I do this is based on a study in 2009, and multiple studies have come since then. This was like the first, I guess the most important study of its kind. The researchers found this: Americans are likely to list their own internal psychological characteristics, such as athlete, outgoing, love music, whereas East Asians are more likely to list their roles in relationships. I actually personally put some of mine in there, which is a son, a husband, a professor, tennis coach, because I also help coach the high school tennis team where we live. So is this a good thing or a bad thing? The answer is it depends. This isn't a value judgment so much as it is an observation, especially looking at cultural trends and even political trends, historical trends. These authors, I'll just call them by the first name, Joe, Steve, and Era, have defined this, a Western perspective as, are you weird? And this has a lot to do with your identity. In my child and family advocacy class, I have them read half of the book, The Righteous Mind. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, by Jonathan Haidt. Highly recommend it. It's the moral roots, understanding the moral roots of liberals and conservatives. He talks about these authors' perspective. If you live in a country that is Western, educated, industrialized, rich, or democratic, and industrialized means more of like a first world country, democratic does not mean a bunch of Democrats. It means where we, the people, have a vote in the government and the policies and the policymakers. If you live in an area that meets all those, you're technically weird. Now, they've done some moral dilemma studies where one of them was a family had a dog. The dog got hit by a car accidentally. The family always heard that dog food or dog meat was really good. Is it more, they decide to eat the dog instead of bury the dog, and then is this morally wrong? I've asked this question to my students many, many times, and it's fun to see them debate, like, well, what culture are they from? Did the dog die on purpose? And so it's good. They're asking all these contextual clues and information, which is important. But in their studies, they found the more weird you are, the more likely you are to just say, it doesn't really matter as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. In fact, this is what the authors conclude. The more weird you are, the more you see the world full of separate objects rather than relationships. Well, what does this have to do with identity? It has a lot to do with identity, and has a lot to do with your own personal well-being, and it has a lot to do with society. Let me give you a broader context here. I've been going to the United Nations, particularly the Commission on the Status of Women, for about 13 years. And the Commission on the Status of Women seeks to promote gender equality and women empowerment, two things I believe firmly in. Having 3 daughters myself, a wife, a mother, 4 sisters, and 75% of my students are female, I definitely believe in gender equality, women empowerment. Now, not everybody diagnoses inequalities and disempowerment the same way throughout the world. In CSW, I'm going to call the shorthand, Commission on the Status of Women, there's definitely a diversity and a plurality of views, and I think that's good. While I am there, and I've met with delegates from dozens of countries, and I've consulted with them, and I'm actually moving to New York City this fall for a sabbatical to work with some diplomacy, family policy, and advocacy efforts. This is a big group we took last year. This is a mix of BYU Idaho and BYU students and some NGOs that we work with. But ultimately, what we're trying to do, this is basically the UN Bible. So the UN cares about the Sustainable Development Goals. This is called the 2030 Agenda. You may have heard of this. These are 17 goals that UN countries have decided they're going to be their ultimate goal or their guiding star until 2030. So when I meet with diplomats, I ask them, what is it that your country cares most about? And we look at the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can imagine a country like Fiji cares about a lot about life below water, because they're surrounded by water. And here, I'm going to have it move over just a little bit so you can see it all. These are all very worthwhile goals and commendable goals. So I have nothing against these goals at all. In fact, I full send on these goals. It looks like the edge is cut off. So that's very anticlimactic. But some countries care about some goals more than others because of their political, historical, and geographical area. So I guess just to show you some pictures, This is me with one of my students. She's from Central African Republic, and this is the diplomat from Oman. I think it's spelled Oman in the Middle East. You can imagine their views on identity, and they're definitely not a weird culture. They're not Western industrialized or educated, industrialized, rich, or democratic. They have some of those acronyms, but not the whole acronym. And I can't remember all of these countries. I'm pretty sure this is Rwanda, another one of my students who's from Port-au-Prince, Haiti, Sophia, and the delegate from Rwanda. And then Botswana, I think it's Burundi, and I can't remember. I've met with so many, I'm forgetting. Thailand, there's Fiji. Don't remember, but he was a nice guy. And I don't remember her. Very nice woman. I've very rarely met a mean delegate. This is me. I've spoken many, many times on promoting the family and why that matters for Westerners, Easterners, and everybody in between. Shameless plug. Everybody's cheering. Okay, so why does this matter? Because when we're meeting with these delegates, I'll go back to this picture here. When we're meeting with these delegates, we're asking, what do these Sustainable Development Goals, which of them matter to you? And which agendas at CSW particularly fit your country's ideology, political goals, and cultural goals and perspectives. And we've seen there's been a huge mismatch. There has been a strong Western weird view being shoved down the throats, if I can be so bold to say that, down the throats of Middle Eastern, African, and Eastern countries, where they're like, look, we don't buy full send. We are not all in for this agenda. We believe in some of these things, but not so much. And a lot of it comes down to a hyper focus on individualism. And I'll tell you a little bit more about individualism, the strengths and weaknesses of it. So be individualistic and focusing on your own autonomy is not a bad thing. But if it's taken to the extreme, anything to the extreme can be bad. So I'll give you a little background. So Richard Schwader, psychologist and sometimes called a philosopher, he developed 3 ethics. And if you want to think of ethics as lenses by which you view the world, and this is also going to drive your dating relationships, your marital relationships, your family relationships, and your policy and political party and your persuasion that way. Okay? First one is ethic of autonomy. So if you look through the world through this lens, it's based on the idea that people are first and foremost autonomous individuals with wants, needs, and preferences. People should be free to satisfy these wants, needs, and preferences as they see fit. And so societies develop moral concepts such as rights, liberty, and justice, which allow people to coexist peacefully without interfering too much with each other's projects. This is the dominant ethic in individualistic societies. That would be Western societies. And if I say Western, some examples would be Canada, United States, Western Europe. Okay? Now, here's a breakdown of it. The individual is the primary unit of society through this lens. The United States has definitely has fully bought into this for the betterment and for the worse. Morality is about protecting rights, ensuring personal choice, and preventing harm to others. In daily life, choosing a career based on personal passion rather than family tradition. Now, again, I'm not saying that these are all good or bad. I'm just saying that this is what the lens would say. It just is sort of a thing. Deciding whom to marry based solely on individual fulfillment. Now, is that a good or a bad thing? Well, you're going to have to decide. I'm going to share some data and some trends that will shed a light on it, and you're going to have to make an informed decision on what you think about this. But in policy, focusing on no-fault divorce would be an ethic of autonomy lens, or reproductive rights as expressions of individual liberty. I find it quite fascinating that the pro-choice movement, my body, my choice, was that phrase was stolen during COVID by the anti-vax and anti-maskers. They said, my body, my choice. And yet one was from the left, one was from the right. Kind of a weird irony there, but I would say there's a heavy emphasis on ethic of autonomy. Now the erosion, when autonomy is the only lens by which you view the world, marriage is seen as a contract of convenience rather than a covenant of stability. And I don't mean in one particular religion or church. This can lead to the erosion of healthy family formation because the individual's right to leave is prioritized over the child's right to a stable foundation. I have many friends and family members who have bought into this, who have left their family in the name of individual freedom. Now, whether it was justified and whether that was actually produced the best outcomes in them and their family, I can only point to research and statistics, and I can't speak for them personally. But let's get to an example here. I was on the New York subway, as I've been on many, many times, and I saw this on the subway. This is an ad for, I think it's for cybersecurity of some sorts. My son, who is actually studying cybersecurity. But the message really caught my attention because it says, a free and open society is a society where we have the right to privacy, the right to our own beliefs, thoughts, and emotions, and the right to decide for ourselves exactly when and with whom we want to share them. It's only in such a society that new ideas can flourish and progress can occur. This really captured my attention because I'm like, this is coming from a weird, and I don't mean like strange, right? Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. From a weird society. It's also coming from a very heavy ethic of autonomy lens. It sounds like a society where people are interacting as in groups, but really it's just a bunch of individuals trying to clamor for what they want. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm going to leave that up to you, but I want to share some things in a moment that'll help you make that decision. Now, ethic of community, this is different. You could say that first ethic of autonomy was a bit more of category 1 in your identifiers that you guys just listed for yourself. This would be a little bit more of category 2. And my goal here is not to say you need to buy into just 2 and not 1. My goal is to help you see all 3 lenses and see the pros and cons of them. So this is based on the idea that people are first and foremost members of larger entities, such as families, teams, armies, companies, tribes, and nations. These larger entities are more than the sum of the people who compose them. They are real, they matter, and they must be protected. People have an obligation to play their assigned roles in these entities, and many societies therefore develop moral concepts such as duty, hierarchy, respect, reputation, and patriotism. Now, these are dirty words to people who are strong in the weird camp and strong in the ethic of autonomy camp, but they don't have to be. I would say the radical version of ethic of autonomy is dangerous. And when I use the word radical, I mean extreme, and it's untethered from any balancing checks or balances. Just as the radical version of ethic of community is dangerous. In fact, if I could give an example, I'd say Nazi Germany is an example of an extreme version of ethic of a community, devoid of autonomy. But that's my own personal interpretation of Richard Schwader's lens. So a quick breakdown. The core idea of a community is the person is a member of a social entity, family, clan, or nation. Morality is about fulfilling duties, respecting roles, and maintaining social harmony. In daily life, adult child moving back home to care for aging parents because it is their duty, even if it limits their career autonomy. In policy, defining parental rights as fundamental responsibilities and capacities that are pre-political and foundational to society. And then in practice, viewing the family as the first justice system where a mother and father provide essential protections for their children's flourishing. Now, a little caveat here. You may be reading this and going, I'm not a fan of parental rights because, for example, I was speaking at an event at the United Nations. I think this is 2023, 24-ish. And the main theme of the event was parental rights. And during the Q&A session, a woman in the back, and I can't remember what country she was from, she didn't actually ask a question, which is very common. I'd say it's CSW. Instead of asking a question, sometimes people go on emotional rants. And she just went off and she says, you want to put the power back in the parents' hands? Parents are the abusers. And then she started ranting a little more. And my first thought was, this woman was abused by her parents. And that's so tragic and terrible. And my response is, the parental institution isn't broken, but people are. And just because we've had a bad experience with an electrical appliance doesn't mean we forego the use of electricity. But I can see how this could be a really scary thing because some parents are incompetent and are not fit to be parents. They're going to cause more harm than good. So we have to be able to look at those. Now, ethic of community lens by itself could care less about that. And if you just isolate it to community, you'd say, nope, too bad parents. We don't need a social work system. We just need the parents to be able to have that right. Now, let me give you an example of this. I was on the New York subway 12-ish years earlier, and I think this is a view of ethic of community. They had these all over, these public service announcements, almost trying to teach values to New Yorkers. And it said, offer your seat to an elderly, disabled, or pregnant person. Even better, add a smile. To me, this was saying ethic of community because, look, we're living in a society and there's other people that matter, and you have a duty to respect your elders. And it doesn't matter if this, in fact, there was another one that says, dude, stop the spread. And there was a guy with his legs spread wide open because he was taking way too much space. And then another one that said, this is your travel car, not your dining car. And somebody had like fast food all over them. This is basically saying, hey, Captain Me Planet, it's not all about you. There's other people that exist in this world. We're living in a society and a community. So I thought the contrast was quite interesting of the very first one being ethic of autonomy, which was more recent, and then the other one, this is more of an ethic of community. So ethic of divinity is the third one. I'm not going to lean too heavily into this one right now, but I think it's really important to note for some of my suggestions I'll offer at the end. And that is based on the idea that people are first and foremost temporary vessels within a divine soul has been implanted. I'm not stating this from a particular religion or faith tradition. This is Richard Schwader's observation of major world religions. Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and others, Buddhism. People are not just animals with an extra serving of consciousness. They are children of God and should behave accordingly. The body is a temple, not a playground. Even if it does no harm and violates nobody's rights, when a man habitually views pornography, he still shouldn't do it. Of course, this is through the ethic of autonomy lens. He shouldn't do it because it degrades women, himself, dishonors his creator, and violates the sacred order of the universe. So you can see how there are pros and cons to this one too. Here's my summary of these three. Is especially going back to what you just defined yourself as. How we define the self determines how we think, what we think society owes us, and what we think we owe each other. So I'm going to show you a clip here. This is from this is an LGBTQIA plus panel, and this was done by Vice. Fascinating. I saw this. This was during I think Trump's first presidential election cycle. And there's a wide range. They interviewed, 10 LGBTQIS plus individuals. And they had different views. Like some of them were conservative, some of them were liberal. And I just took this clip because I thought it was a fascinating illustration of individualism, for better or for worse. So hopefully you'll be able to see it. And they're going to have a debate on what queer means.
I'm sorry, could I ask a question? Because I think this is really important and relevant. I feel like the majority of people who feel like they're still struggling with lack of equality are people who are identifying as queer. I don't identify as queer. That does not define me. That's not a word I want to be called as a gay man. So what I'd like to know is, what is the definition of queer? For the people who identify as queer, what does that mean?
I've always known it as a slur.
He's the moderator, right?
No, I just don't want to have the discussion if we don't establish that. Like,
That's a good conversation. That's a good point. Who here identifies as queer? Raise your hand. Okay. For the people who didn't raise their hands, why? What are your thoughts and feelings on the word queer?
We were talking before, and we said like queer was supposed to be like a put down or a diss. You know what I mean? I look at it myself. It's a regular red-blooded American gay guy. I don't really see why I have to be all these other letters and all this other stuff added to it. No offense to anyone, but it sounds a little bit nuts to me. I don't understand why we have to be all this other stuff. Like, why can't I just be gay and be happy with that? Or why do I have to look at, if I'm not, queer or binary, whatever, then I'm like privileged in some way. And it's like, I'm from the hood just like anybody else. Where's all this privilege I'm supposed to have coming from? Because I don't have it. It really is. And I'm gay, it's hard to keep up.
I think that my issue is not what you identify as, it's when you try to tell me what I should identify as. And if I say that I'm queer, non-binary, or if I say I'm a shoe, that's my business. And I don't think that... Who's telling
you what to identify as?
I'm just responding. What I'm saying is that people who say that queer is what you said offensive, my thing is like, why does it matter what I identify as? It's my identity.
You're claiming it's the source of your oppression. So since it's the source of your oppression, what is it?
What I said...
What do you mean by that, Brendan? I think you should expand on it a little bit.
Well, I'm noticing that the people who say that they're still victimized and oppressed here in this country are the people who are identifying as queer, non-binary, gender fluid, all these different things. What is it? What does queer mean? So in order for me to support you or not support you, I need to understand you.
Have you read up on the word queer? Have you Googled it?
Yeah, have you?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
All
The definition in the dictionary is a whole laundry list of derogatory terms, which I think are apt. I think it's an insult. I think it's a slur. I think it's low rent. I think it's embarrassing. I think it's degrading. I think it's demeaning.
Okay. I
Yeah.
think we get it.
It means weird in the dictionary, and if we're trying to get to a place where we normalize our community, I don't think labeling us as weird is really the right way to do it.
And maybe that's why you're not
Okay,
accepted.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so they go on and on. I thought that was a fascinating discussion. The point of watching this video is not to be pro or anti-Trump. As you can see, there's different views on this, nor does it have anything to do with your views on LGBTQ individuals. But the fascinating thing, and I love these kinds of discussions because it's robust, it's diverse, and it shows there's a plurality of views even within the LGBTQ community. And there's some disagreement. You can hear a lot of ethic of autonomy coming out here as individual internal sense of identifiers. Again, not saying it's good or bad, it just is. And this is, you will see debates like this much more likely in the Western world because we have the freedom to be able to identify however we want and express ourselves how we want. But it's tough because if you only lean into ethic of autonomy, and I'd say whether gay, straight, or anything in between is less relevant in this discussion, if you're only viewing the world ethic of autonomy, then we only see people as separate individuals rather than in the terms of relationships, or as the authors say, separate objects. And why this matters is because, I don't know if you've ever seen the first Incredibles movie, where Syndrome is trying to take down all the superheroes, and then he's trying to make everybody super, because he says, if everybody's super, no one is. And we found in cultures and societies where everybody tries to get what they want individually, if everybody's free to do whatever they want with no restrictions, then really nobody's free. So there has to be some checks and balances here of autonomy, community, and divinity. Professor Carl Trueman, he's a theologian and a philosopher at Grove City College. He said, a society's understanding of the notion of self has broad implications for cultural, moral, and political spheres. The modern notion of self, which can be called expressive individualism, lies at the heart of current cultural conflicts, including abortion, pornography, the ethics of life and death, radical racial politics, not just racial, but radical, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion. Expressive individualism holds that human beings are defined by their individual psychological core. Remember, that was the first of the two categories at the beginning, and that the purpose of life is allowing that core to find social expression in relationships. Anything that challenges that idea is deemed oppressive. Building a society based on true understanding of the human person begins with acknowledgement of the situation in which we find ourselves. So I think having those internal sense of self and identifiers, it doesn't seem to be wrong unless it goes unchecked and there's nothing else to balance that out. So Jonathan Haidt, NYU professor, said when you put individuals first before society, then any rule or social practice that limits personal freedom can be questioned. If it doesn't protect somebody from harm, then it can't be morally justified. It's just a social convention. That's from the ethic of autonomy lens. Again, I've already mentioned that. Okay, so what does this have to do with families? Well, you can imagine that if two people are dating or cohabiting, living together, and they're trying to form a romantic relationship, maybe long-term, then two people who are seeking after a long-term stable relationship, focusing only on their own internal sense of self and only their internal wants and needs, whether real or perceived, is a recipe for disaster for long-term committed relationships. But this doesn't mean that you have to be in an oppressive relationship and stay in a boring, anti-romantic relationship. Let me give you some research about this. I'm going to skip this quote because for the sake of time. Family structure and family stability matter because family bonds, belonging, and commitment matter if we want to eradicate like social poverty, which is different than economic poverty. Also eradicating sexual exploitation and many other issues that I've researched on this topic. What does this have to do with family life? Because family has to do with relationships, has to do with sacrifice and commitment and a sense of belonging. Even John Bowlby, the father of attachment theory, has said that every human being has an innate need, even just a high enough drive, maybe higher than food, water, or shelter, to be seen, to be loved by and known, especially by those who create them. And I would say expressive Western modern individualism doesn't jive well with that idea. Here's why. Dr. Sarah Halpern, she's at the Institute for research of poverty. She says social poverty, the lack of close and trusted relationships one could rely on, is a distinct phenomenon worthy of serious attention, not just as a derivative of economic poverty, although the two phenomena are correlated. Financial poverty matters without a doubt. However, to assert that the presence of financial poverty, no other issue can or should receive priority, fails to respect the wishes, plans, and needs of low-income people. In other words, if we're trying to address poverty in this country or any other country, and we don't address the lack of long-term committed, loving, bonded relationships where someone can be seen and known and loved, then we're really never going to ever solve economic poverty. And I'll give you some research on that as well. In 1989, 1990, sociologists have this phenomenon called the Great Crossover in the United States, where the average age of first child for women was younger than the average age of first marriage for women in the United States. Now, I know many people think the idea of first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby, and the baby carriage is antiquated and an old idea. But research has found that it's actually quite stabilizing for children, for women, for men, and for society. So this can be problematic. And a lot of this came from, historically, the sexual revolution, where we separated lovemaking from baby making, and we focused just on our own individual rights and needs and wants, which is a good thing. But again, without the community lens, then it's going to be wreaking havoc, which is what has happened. Fatherlessness is, I think, one of the biggest evidences of radical individualism and ethic of autonomy. Because if you look through almost every country in the world, this is a problem. In the United States, you see that 17.8 million children, 1 in 4, live without a biological step or adoptive father in the home. This is in the United States. These children are in greater risk of poverty, more likely to have behavioral problems, greater risk of infant mortality, more likely to go to prison, more likely to commit crime, more likely to become pregnant as a teen, more likely to face abuse and neglect, more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, suffer from obesity, and drop out of school. These are all fruits of the revolution of a very, very weird culture where men have realized that they can get out of commitment and sacrifice and love and rearing their children, and maybe even staying committed to the mother for whom they helped create the child. I'll help you make that connection a little bit more. Why do this area really matters to me, not just as a father, but as somebody who's studied this a lot? Let me tell you a little bit of research on why this matters for girls. Daughters who are raised in homes where the father is active and present and loving, not just physically present, but emotionally absent. These are the advantages she has, which is extremely empowering. And I'm always telling UN diplomats, if you want to empower women and promote gender equality, let's get fathers back involved in the girls' lives. Instead of trying to step on men to elevate women, let's try to see that they have an active role and an important role. And if they can have rights and responsibility. Once you divorce rights from responsibility, it wreaks havoc on the individual who believes it and the relationships they have and for society. And these men, these women, or these girls need their fathers and their mothers. I would say mothers, I'd go in depth on mothers, but I'm not doing it simply because motherlessness is not an epidemic or a pandemic where fatherlessness is. I'm sure you've all know basic biology. When a child is born, a mother is nearby. That's a fact of reproductive biology. But the question for culture, for policy, for society is, will a father be nearby? And if so, for how long? And how long will he stay committed to the mother and to the child? So you can read through this list. I think they're very significant. I could unpack each of them, but for the sake of time, I won't. If you want to ask more questions during the Q&A about this, you can. Let me give you one study that I think, as far as like sexual empowerment and romantic empowerment, research is finding over and over again that fathers are the ones who set the stage for all future male relationships for his daughter, how she will see, understand, and interact with boys and men. One study in particular, there was a big outcry when this was big on MTV, 16 and Pregnant and Teen Mom. Oh no, all the teenage girls are going to watch this and it's going to glorify being a teen mom, and so we better take this off the air. Well, Paul Wright and his colleagues at Indiana University decided to study this to see if it actually was going to be just a case of behavioral modeling, kind of like the Bobo doll experiment, where the children watched the adults beat up the Bobo doll and then they mimicked the behavior. Are these teenage girls going to do the same thing when they watch 16 and Pregnant and Teen Mom? Well, this is what they found, that the more involved the father was with the girl's life, the less sexual intercourse she engaged in when she watched the show. So here's what they concluded. The association between exposure to 16 and pregnant teen mom and females' recent intercourse behavior was contingent upon the degree to which fathers were communicated with them about sex while they were growing up. In short, the researchers said that fathers give their daughters, especially if they're not overbearing, because sometimes dads can be, and I know I have 3 daughters, sometimes when guys want to date or be with my girls, I have this protective instinct that kicks in. I'm sure moms do as well. But if dads aren't overbearing and toxic, and they're more like these fathers, they give their daughters a sexual script to know how to interact and see men and form healthy relationships, knowing how to follow a pattern of you don't trust somebody more than you know them, you don't rely on them more than you trust them, you don't commit to them more than you rely on them, and you don't touch them more than the other 4. Because if you get that reversed, researchers have found that it really messes up the brain and people can't make rational decisions because they get too Twitter-pated. They don't use that word. I know it's not a scientific term, but they get too infatuated. And this happens for males and females. Fascinating that girls had less sex the more they watched the show if dad was involved, and the more they watched the show with dad was not involved and not talked to them about sex, the more intercourse they had. Which is why you see a pattern of girls are 7 times more likely to be pregnant as a teenager without an involved father. And I can give you the resources to all of these. If you want to look up the studies, I can send them to you. I'm just not going to fill up my slides with a bunch of references because that's, I think, boring, and I can send it to you later. Here's a cycle that has been repeated over and over and over again. If a father is not present, especially in the name of ethic of autonomy, I'm going to do whatever I want. I have the right to not to be committed. I have the right not to raise my child. I have the right to have sex with whoever I want, as long as it's consensual. And you've got this daughter reaching out that's a cold and distant father, and then she starts to get a distorted view of love. She grows up, she's more vulnerable. This is correlational, not causational, but we see this over and over, and I can give you the studies for this as well. She's more likely to have discordant relationships with men. I call it the toxic spectrum of trust. She's either going to use men for her own gain, and she doesn't really trust them, or she's going to avoid them altogether, or she will allow herself to be used. So discordant relationships with men, she's not happy, she's more sexually vulnerable, more likely to be sexually exploited. It's not because the father caused it, he just created an environment to make it more likely. And then sadly, we can see this as a rinse and repeat pattern in cultures and in countries. Countries who go full send in ethic of autonomy that are extremely weird, again, WI, the acronym, are more likely to have this pattern because they see the world as in separate objects rather than terms of relationships. And the men buy that. And then women, there's many cultures, even in the United States, and subcultures where it's the norm. Like with that, the guy's not going to stick around, so oh well, we just got the government programs, which I'm not against government programs, but we have these government programs and the government, in essence, becomes the father. And that becomes the norm in some subcultures. Now, we can promote an auspicious cycle, and this is not saying everybody has to get married, but marriage is the institution that not guarantees, but makes it the most likely the father will stick around and that the mother has the love and support she wants and needs as well. So you can see this pattern here. I call this the auspicious cycle, and we can rinse and repeat that. These are in countries and cultures where there's a healthy balance of ethic of community, divinity, and autonomy. So this is not removing anyone's rights, but it is also adding responsibility and realizing that we are governed by something outside of ourselves rather than just our own internal drives, passion, wants, and needs, which matter, but if they matter above all else, to the divorcing of everything else, then more divorce happens. Fathers and sons, there's a snapshot. These are what fathers do for their boys. It's been said that prisons are just holding cells for fatherless boys, and you look at the statistics, it's not false. It's a true statement. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I wish we had time to get into it. If you want to get into it, I could talk about rough and tumble play, what he does to do scaffold the boy to help him channel any aggressive tendencies that it may have, because boys, on average, for the most part, are more aggressive physically than girls are, and that's the presence of testosterone. But that being said, they're also more likely to have healthier relationships with women and to treat them with respect and not use and abuse them. Again, more likely. I bet you could all think of somebody who has a loving, involved father that did not turn out with a lot of these outcomes or did not have a lot of these outcomes. We would call those outliers, but they exist, and if you zoom in on them, you can start to make sense of them. So outliers don't negate the rule, just like people who have been in a car accident, severe car accident, and didn't wear a seatbelt and they survived. It doesn't mean seatbelts are not necessary. We just have to figure out why that case it didn't work. But we don't throw out the rule simply because we know outliers. I think we can hold on to both at the same time. Here's an example, I think, of one man who's trying to say, look, ethic of autonomy and community matter. A lot of people are raised in homes without fathers. And he's trying to be a father figure, and this is what I've told many people at the UN and workshops I've done with parents. And I remember I had a lesbian woman from Kazakhstan come up to me after one of my presentations on father-daughter relationships at the UN. She says, me and my partner have a daughter. According to the research, what should we do? And I said, well, I bet you love her very much. And she said, I do. I bet you're phenomenal mothers. She said, we are. And I said, do you have any brothers you trust? Because your daughter's going to need a father figure. So love is important. But what matters for children is family structure and family strengths, both of those. You can have the strengths without structure and vice versa. So I encouraged her to have a father figure, somebody she trusts. You don't want to just grab a random dude off the street, right? You don't trust that guy. But do you have a brother or somebody close to you trust? This man tried to be a father figure for the YouTube community. I took a few quotes just off of the comment section for this YouTube video. He was just teaching how to put up a shelf. Now, moms can teach that too, but I don't know why, but he decided to just put up a video that shows how to hang a shelf. These are what these people said. Just a little dad advice. You're just the best. Boyfriend, come here. Me. Hold on, my dad's teaching me how to hang a shelf. It's not really her dad. It's 3 a.m. and I can't sleep and I don't need a shelf, yet here I am. Why am I crying about a video on how to hang a shelf? Saw this on Reddit. I hope you read at least some of the comments because I want you to know you're a very good man. Thank you for doing this. Signed, the child of a single mother. This is not to demean single mothers. I think we need to celebrate them and the very real circumstances that they're in, and we need to support them. But you see a lot of what one research calls as father hunger or father need here. And it's the consequences of a revolution that's become so individualistic that family formation is not happening in a very healthy way, and family stability is being fragmented and broken apart quite a bit. And people are hungry for that. I'll skip this. This just shows what researchers have found, that what they call it the millennial success sequence, that if millennials, researchers have found that if they follow the pattern of education, job, and marriage, and then children, they are more likely to be move from poverty to middle class, or from middle class or up. It's echoed social economic mobility, moving from low to high. Yuri Bronfenbrenner, have you guys studied that? I bet you had to have heard of Bronfenbrenner. Anybody heard of Bronfenbrenner? Okay, a few of you, good. I love his bioecological systems theory, but as he's looked at all of society and studied it, he has said the family is the most powerful, the most humane, and by far the most economical system known for building competence and character. Not the school system, not the government, not nonprofits, and all those things are important. We shouldn't eradicate those, we shouldn't get rid of them, but if they start replacing the family, that's a problem. So let me wrap up with a few things. I'm going to skip that. Here's some suggestions of what I think can be done, and I could give you a lot longer list than you would ever want. I'll give you 6 items. Number 1, normalize dependence as developmental. Ethics, I'm going to give you the ethics that were balanced in this idea. Autonomy and community. Publicly affirm that dependence is not dysfunction, especially in childhood, caregiving, disability, and aging. Challenge the myth that maturity equals independence, because we all know people who are old and are not very good with the freedom that they have. I won't name people that I know personally, but yes, maybe that is me to a certain extent. Encourage language like interdependence is a sign of strength and needing others is part of being human. Number 2, I would recommend that reframe success beyond individual achievement. Not getting rid of it, but beyond. Here are all three that are balanced here, all three ethics, and that would be expand definitions of success to include faithful caregiving, stable marriages, raising emotionally healthy children, service to family and community, and highlight alumni, maybe even at a university, and public figures who prioritize family formation, not just career milestones. I get a little bothered when I hear somebody constantly bragging about their CV, and then they constantly make statements that seem to be like marriage and family are the end of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, it probably is for some people, especially if you're in a relationship where somebody is extremely ethic of autonomy based, that is narcissistic. In that case, it's not marriage that's a problem, it's that person. And they're not ready for such a committed, stable relationship. Number 3, restore moral language without moral coercion. So here are 2 of the ethics that are balanced, divinity and autonomy. Reintroduce vocabulary like responsibility, stewardship, and by the way, this is also while we're introducing, we keep the words of rights, stewardship, obligation, sacrifice, and covenant, which is the more not sectarian or a particular religion. So teaching students how moral traditions across cultures and address family life. And then number 4, ask family impact questions in policy design. This is what I do a lot at the state and especially international level. You can see which ethics are balanced here. Encourage policymakers and students to ask, how does this policy affect family formation? Does it strengthen or weaken caregiving relationships? Does it assume independence where dependence is natural? All right, next one, number 5, support families without replacing them. These are the 2 ethics that are balanced. Advocate for policies that supplement families, not substitute them. Empower parents rather than sideline them. And examples would include flexible work policies, family-friendly tax structures, and childcare that supports parental choice. Lastly, I'm going to say, reject the false choice between freedom and responsibility. We would call that a false dichotomy, meaning that you can only choose one and they're both bad. Oh, how about we hold on to both? This, I think, balances all 3. We can teach that freedom without responsibility is fragile, responsibility without freedom is oppressive, and meaning binds both together. I'd like to finish with, this is we won't watch this video now, but if you want to watch it, it's at Shreveport, Louisiana, where out-of-wedlock births are higher than almost any state in the country. These dads decided to go and just be positive influences at their kids' schools and just be father figures because there was a lot of violence and bullying that was happening at the school, and the teachers and administrators didn't know what to do. So they showed up, they created this nonprofit called Dads on Duty, almost like a fight, no fight happened after that. And it's not because the dads were like, stop it. They were being positive father figures for hundreds of students who did not have an involved active father. And this movement has spread to many other states in this country. There we go. Here's all 3. And I think, according to research and my observations working with UN diplomats and even at the state level, that this is where healthy balance happens. We have decreased crime, poverty, violence, addiction, sexual exploitation, and less mental illness when these 3 are brought into harmony. So however you identified yourself at the beginning, I think we should always be identifying ourselves in both categories, internal, subjective criteria, and other criteria that's more maybe the Eastern, Middle Eastern, such as objective criteria that include roles and responsibilities. Restoring a family lens does not require rejecting individual freedom, nor does it require imposing religious belief. It requires remembering that autonomy, community, and moral meaning were never meant to operate in isolation. Human flourishing emerges when all 3 are held in creative tension. And I leave you with this picture that's at the United Nations. It's a mural there. That's a famous mural. You'll notice a lot's going on. I won't explain it, but you can Google it because it's a very historical and telling mural here. But I want to draw your attention to the middle. There is a family and they have children around them, and you can see that this is centered there for a reason. And sadly, I think too many countries of cultures have lost this. It doesn't mean that every country and culture have to be the same, but I would hope that our autonomy is balanced with community and divinity, and rights with responsibility, and love with sacrifice. Thank you. Okay, questions? Does that work? Sorry, I fire hosed you with a lot of stuff. Paul.
So what policy recommendations would you see in the United States? There was an article in Deseret News today that talked about marriage penalties in the tax system and so forth. I don't know if you had a chance to read it or not.
I haven't read it yet.
But it talked about how we may discourage marriage through some of the policies that we see with taxes and qualifying for certain benefits, the benefit cliff idea. Any thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, and I guess a few thoughts is that the policies we've had at the state and federal level, they've vacillated over the years, as I'm sure you're aware. And sometimes at times they've encouraged marriage and committed marriage, and other times it's almost like the policymakers forgot why that existed, and then they started incentivizing just parenthood without the marriage. So anything that would help incentivize marriage, not coerce it, but law shapes culture, and culture shapes law. You can start, a lot of people try to create cultural change from the top down. That means from government. Some people try to create law change from the bottom up. That's from culture. And I think both are needed. And so if we can have policies, and I haven't seen that most recent one, but if we have policies that do reflect the importance of marriage for stability for the children, and it doesn't mean they have to stay in a marriage if it's abusive or oppressive. But if we can do that with a child's rights, I think that's really any tax code or tax policy or law. If it can be a child's rights perspective rather than adult wants perspective, then we do a lot better. So that's not speaking to your particular, that one, because I haven't read up on it yet. So, yeah. Yes.
So you talk about a lot of different research looking at the impact of fathers on child development, right? So a lot of the benefits you've highlighted are hard to tease apart from SES financial stability. And there's also differences between the benefits that we see from a biological father that's involved versus a step or even just any other male. And you even kind of mentioned you have a brother that you trust, right?
Yeah.
You added that caveat because we have things like the Cinderella effect, right? Where we see children under the age of 1 being murdered at incredibly higher rates by stepfathers.
Yeah. Usually the highest rates are in cohabiting relationships where it's a live-in boyfriend who has no biological attachment to the child.
Yeah, right? And so, again, it's hard to tease apart, is this the father, or is it that the children are being exposed to stability and, involved caring parents, right? What is it that is unique about the father versus even 2 fathers or 2 mothers, right? I think it's hard to actually tease apart the research that looks at this that says this is the unique element that only fathers provide.
I would say this way. I think there's a lot of things that moms and dads do equally well, and according to the research. But there's also some things that mothering and fathering brings to the parenting regime. And as I zoomed into this research quite a bit, there are some things that 2 moms and 2 dads can do equally well. But there are some things that unique to fathers and some things unique to mothers. And that's why I think father figures, in fact, I have many people I know personally who were raised in homes, single moms, or even same-sex parenting, like two moms or 2 dads, but they still, when they got the mother or the father figure, that added an extra element of these outcomes that we're talking about. So it's not to be oppressive to a particular parenting structure, family structure, but simply to, as I zoom in it and I start to tease it apart, there are things, for example, for a father to be involved in their daughter's life, there's multiple studies that show that menarche starts later with those girls than it does with daughters who are raised in a home they didn't have a loving, active father present. And
Also, right?
yes, and there's some mixed results on stepfathers as well. But because stepfathers, and it's hard to know whether it's a male presence, because evolutionary psychologists have their own explanation of it. A lot of people are saying they're just shooting in the dark to try to explain it, but they see this trend as real. So one explanation is, from an evolutionary standpoint, is that evolutionary psychology posits that we are trying to survive and have our posterity survive, survival of the fittest, and so we have to learn to adapt. How do I have my species or my posterity or my offspring survive? Well, one theory for this daughter's delayed sexual development is that her body, early sexual development with uninvolved fathers, her body is getting into reproductive mode because there isn't a male father figure there to protect her to be able to survive. And we're talking about from across different species. To be able to survive, and then if she has offspring, she may not live long enough to have offspring, so she goes into reproductive mode, her body starts early. So it can perpetuate the species better. That's the evolutionary psychology. I think there's some merit to that, but I can't give you one hard and fast, this is the reason why. But my hypothesis is that stepfathers who are loving and involved would probably have a very similar impact on the girls. And it's not just a biological thing. But as we know, that's a murky situation, right? Because some stepfathers are better than others. Some are very loving and involved. I've talked to some of my students who have a lot of students who have stepfathers, and it's mixed. Some of them will say, yeah, he's like a friend, but I never saw him as a father figure. And others say, yeah, he's my dad. That, we were tight, and he had a huge influence on me. And all those outcomes that I shared were true for that particular person. So yeah, it's hard to tease apart, I think, from a zoomed out perspective. But when I start zooming in and I start seeing there are some clear differences between mothers and fathers that do matter, even though there's significant overlap between the two. So, yeah.
How can someone who's not religious incorporate divinity?
Good question. Divinity to me is, to Richard Schwader, I would say, is more of is there something outside of you that helps you govern not just your identity, but rules for yourself, values and morals, something that's not just internal, although that matters. And that for some people it's Mother Nature, for others maybe laws of nature. But yeah, there are people from all religions who still prescribed, or from different religions that prescribe to this idea that there's something bigger than me. I've worked in addiction recovery before, and I've heard the men that I've worked with, there's often this reference even in the research to, if you reference a higher power, something beyond you, it doesn't have to be a specific type of God or who the God is, but recognizing that has actually had a pretty significant help on their recovery and their movement from out of addiction. So I wouldn't say that you would have to prescribe to a particular God, but if you see there's something beyond you, whether that's the cosmos or its nature or laws of nature, that's probably a good place to start. Have you ever been to national parks? Yeah. Is there one in particular that is this is my favorite one?
Yeah, Zion.
Okay, that's one of my top 3. Just don't like that it's overrun with people all the time. But there's something, I don't know about you. Tell me your name. Jason?
Yeah.
So Jason, have you ever gone to these national parks, particularly Zion since it's your favorite, and been like, wow, I just feel like a little dot? Yeah, to me, I think it's a good zoom out perspective. Anytime, and that's, I think, tiptoeing towards the ethic of divinity, regardless of your religious persuasion or your lack thereof. National parks is just an example where I go to, for me, it's the Redwood Forest is my number one. Don't everybody go there because it's my favorite place. Just kidding. But there's something that I feel like it's divine and makes me realize I'm not the only thing on this planet and there's something bigger than me. And it helps me it influences my moral compass and code. It doesn't mean that I have to throw out my internal sense of self, but it also helps me zoom out and realize it's not just all about me. So I don't know if that helps, but that can be one example if you're not looking for a particular religion to help you zoom out. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm actually going to Zion this April, so maybe I'll see you there.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.